Hello, everyone. We're here for another session of Cocktails with Cruising World. It's going to be a fun day, I think. We have Wendy Mitman Clarke joining us from Chesapeake Bay, and Herb McCormick, the Senior Executive Editor at Cruising World from Newport, Rhode Island. Just a little bit before we get started in earnest here, if you're not familiar with Zoom, you can, at the bottom of the screen, if you move a cursor down there, you'll see a Q&A button. And if you open that up, you can ask questions, ask Wendy questions, ask questions, wherever you want to ask. And Herb and I'll be monitoring it, and Herb can pass them along to Wendy as they come up. And it's going to just be a freewheeling discussion here, and have a little fun. Can't forget to make a note of our sponsor, Mount Gay Rum, some mighty fine sailing rum. I have the Eclipse. Herb has the Aged, I think. I managed to mix mine with a little orange juice. Mighty tasty. Thank you, Mount Gay. So, Wendy, you were off cruising with your family for 4 glorious years, up and down the east coast of the U.S. and a little bit into Central America. And why don't you kind of tell us about your adventures, where your travels took you?
Sure. Well, we left Annapolis and initially headed to the Bahamas and spent a winter there. And then I kind of wanted to come back to the East Coast just because I had actually lost my mom shortly before we left. And I just kind of wanted to come home for a little while, which we did, and went back to Maine that summer and then back to the Bahamas. And at that point, I think we were ready to go. So we headed to the DR and hung out in the DR for a while, and then went all the way across the Caribbean in one passage to Guatemala and spent hurricane season in the Rio Dulce, then out to the Bay Islands, then down to Panama and spent a winter season down in the Gunayala, and then back up to the States, and then back up north. And then we asked the kids at that point, what do you feel like doing? And they said, what we really want to do is be around more people like us. So we said, well, we know there's one place where you can find that, absolutely, and that's Georgetown. So we headed back to Georgetown for that last winter, and we made a lot of really awesome friends and had a really good time. And then after that, off to the Abacos, then up to Bermuda, New England, Nova Scotia, and then came back down the coast and stopped.
That's a lot of miles. How many miles you reckon you put in the 4 years?
I think it was around 26,000, something like that. I started keeping a log, and every time we moved the boat, I tried to keep track. So.
And you were kind of moving all the time?
Yeah, initially we were moving a lot, and that was I think almost born of more like nervousness or feeling like we were supposed to move. It took us a while to get settled down a little bit and feel comfortable just hanging out in places. And I mean, one of the advantages to doing it this way was that we could change it up. If we wanted to go somewhere, like our friends were in Guatemala and said, hey, why don't you come see us, hang out with us for hurricane season? And we thought, oh, well, we hadn't really thought about doing that, but okay. And did a bunch of research and talked to a lot of people who'd been there with kids, made it so that we felt comfortable about it. And then went. So yeah, it was, I coined a term for it called slingshot sailing. It seemed like we just went back and forth a lot. But that's how it worked.
Wendy, over the course of your trip, 24,000 miles is almost the length of a circumnavigation, yet you didn't ever really cross an ocean. You didn't go through the canal and go across the Pacific. You didn't sail to the Med, but you still had amazing amount of adventures. And I think it's something we try to promote in the magazine, these kind of attainable adventures where you don't have to sail around the world to have a really worthwhile, fantastic trip. I mean, can you talk a little bit about what your thoughts were on long term, and also maybe a bit about your experiences in Central America and just sort of that attainable adventure theme?
Well, a funny thing happened to me when it started out, because I'd grown up sailing, and then I'd done a ton of racing with my husband, Johnny, and a lot of offshore racing. I've been to Bermuda. I've been, offshore to Newport. I mean, I've been offshore a bunch of times, but it was always with like 6 big guys and me. in a racing boat, more or less, most often. And so when we got onto Osprey with me, my husband, and my 2 young kids, I kind of had this weird thing happen where I suddenly felt a lot more vulnerable than I'd ever felt on a sailboat ever. I mean, like scared in a way that I'd never been scared before. And it really rocked me, and I couldn't figure out how to manage it. But how it manifested initially was like, I'm too scared to go even 24 hours right now, So initially, like a passage from Charleston to Cumberland Island was awesome. That was a 24-hour passage, and that was like a big deal, which seemed ridiculous to me because, I'd been out for 5, 6, 7 days before. So it was just baffling to me, but it was my reality. So I had to figure out how to make that work. And then, so what ended up happening is over time, we went a little farther and a little farther and a little farther. And each time we went a little farther, I felt a little better. And once we got to the Bahamas, that first winter, we buddied up with a buddy boat down there. And he said, well, hey, let's take off and go to Long Island. So we said, okay. So we kind of followed him out to Long Island. Well, next thing we're like in Cat Island, and then we're in Conception. And then by the end of the season, we're in the Gementos, and I'm up at night looking at lights that are Cuba and thinking, wow, that wasn't so hard, right? It's just a step at a time, a step at a time. And once I kind of internalized that idea that it's a step at a time, you try not to eat the whole elephant, just little bits, then it became a lot easier to manage. And then by the time we left the DR for Guatemala, 2 dear friends of ours flew into Santo Domingo and met us, and we just had a fabulous, great passage fun across the Caribbean. So yeah, and the more time, I will say, just the more confident you get, the more you go, hopefully the more confident you get, the easier it is to start taking those bigger steps. But really, small steps are fine too.
I'm wondering, Wendy, how much it played, having people who are thinking about going with their family, how much of your taking it kind of in easy chunks at the beginning was a reflection on sailing with your kids, and how did they adapt? How did they do?
They did fine. They did a lot better than I did. I mean, they're kids, right? Kids are incredibly adaptable. And our son, who was 11 at the time, our daughter was 8. I think she was a little more reluctant about going than he was. He was all for it, man. He was a pirate. He was ready to roll. And I think that's still the case, actually. But the kids actually adapted very well. There was a lot of loneliness initially, I'll be honest with you. The first year was hard. It was this was 2008. I didn't even have a smartphone. I had a flip phone. Most of my friends still had flip phones. There was no big Facebook group for sailors. I didn't have internet. I didn't have internet. The only time I ever got on the internet was when we got someplace where, we could go into a cafe or get some internet, and I'd download all the mail and email and banking stuff and junk I had to deal with. But frankly, the way people do it today is so very different. They're so much more connected. When I went, there was nobody I was talking to and telling how rotten a time I was having or how great a time I was having. It was really very much, felt very on my own. I think sometimes the kids felt that way too. And that first winter, headed for the Bahamas, we didn't really meet any other kids. There was a lot of retired couples without kids. It wasn't until the second year that we ended up bumping into a family who's become our best friends forever, the Calypsos. They were on a Bristol Channel Cutter 28, Bristol Channel Cutter, and we were on a 45. We passed each other in the waterway and ended up rejoining up in the Bahamas and ended up sailing with them for a long time, and they remain our very, very best friends. So I'd have to say that the kids, the harder part for the parents was you're taking on this whole level of responsibility that you never had to do before. This is a whole different level of parenting and a whole different level of responsibility. So that part was a little tricky, yeah.
Actually, Wendy, we were having a few, just for people who are viewers, Wendy is busy talking, so when you ask a question on either chat or a Q&A, they're coming through me and I can relay them on to Wendy. And Wendy, I've got one here. who was one of our viewers, would like to know your reflections on how cruising as a family influenced your kids. First, in terms of the transition back to normal life after cruising, and second, now that a few years have passed, how they see it as from the perspective of now being young adults. Were there hurdles when they came back?
Yes. Yeah, that's an interesting question, very complicated and not something I'm going to be able to answer thoroughly here, honestly. I think it's an ongoing transition, frankly. Initially, initially when we came back, they ended up going to a school here that we really, everybody loved. But it, coming from the world we were coming from, which was very much that cruising community, and cruising kids are very, very open and outgoing. And, you'd pull into an anchorage and there'd be kids and it'd be like instantly, and there was no barrier, it was just like, hey, let's play, boom. And that was it. Everybody understood that same foundation. Everybody had got that whole thing. And I think all the kids out there also got the desire to be with other kids. And so they didn't let a whole lot interfere with that. You get back on land and you know what it's like. I mean, it's high school. It's high school. And everything becomes this insane political thing, I mean, it's a tricky thing to navigate, even if you've been navigating it your whole life. And our kids hadn't been. They'd been pulled away from that for a long time. So yes, there was a bit of kind of surprise and shock that people were surprised at their attitudes. Like, they would get asked, why do you act like that? I mean, why do you think it's okay to just come up to somebody and say, hey, let's be friends? Which was disappointing. But they got, they figured it out. They did well. They did great, actually. And I think now is an interesting time because they're both in they're 20 and 23. We are living in a very different world with extremely complicated. It's a hard time to be a young adult. I do think that being cruising sailors has helped them in some ways sort of look at that. They're very adaptable, and they've always been very adaptable. And I think a lot of that they learned when they were out there. For my son, it's interesting. He found that the homeschooling, even though we had our struggles with it while we were out there, that method of learning is what he really likes. And when he went to try to learn in a different environment, where it's like 8 hours or 6 hours of classes and 6 hours of homework, he would just be like, why do we have to do it this way? I mean, it made so much more sense the way we did it. You cram it all in, then you go out and have fun. And it took him a while to actually identify that, but now that he has, he knows, he understands how he likes to learn. And that's something that he definitely learned out there. So I don't know if that helps. As I said, I think it's an ongoing transition. Everybody says, oh, how is it, how it was your transition back to land? And to me, it's not a past tense thing necessarily.
So do the kids want to hop on a boat and go sailing for fun, or are they going to be cross-country truck drivers?
I think my daughter's headed to the mountains, and my son would hop on a boat and go sailing for fun anytime anybody asked him. In fact, I think maybe the best advice to give kids their age right now is, here's a Catalina 27, get out of here, just take off for a year because it's crazy out there. You need to just go sailing. I don't know, but yeah, no, he's going to have sailing in his life, I'm sure, for the rest of his life. She, I think, is turning to the mountains, which is another part of what we are. So I get it.
Hey, Wendy, getting back into your trip a little bit. I asked this question to Bea in Gifford last week, and she said it was a really good question, and nobody ever actually said to me like that was a good question before, so I'm going to ask it again. But what I didn't ask Bea her favorite place, but I asked what the most unexpectedly interesting place that you found in your travels as you were going along, a place that you weren't expecting to be great, that it was really cool.
Well, we found a place that we didn't even know existed. And that is when we were in the Bay Islands getting ready to head to Panama, we met this cruiser who was headed north with his wife, and he, I don't know, it's some, whatever, Sundowner or whatever. And he said, oh, do you want some charts? And we said, yeah, sure, great. And so he handed us these charts, and one of the charts was for this island called Providencia, which I'd never even heard of. And he said, oh, that's like on the way down. So if you have to stop, it's a great place to stop. Well, we did. We had a rock and ride down out of Honduras and around the corner, and we were headed down, and we had weather coming, so we pulled in there, and it was an amazing place. It's actually a Colombian island, even though it's right off the coast of Nicaragua. It was how I imagined it would be to fetch like a Pacific island, these huge tumbling green mountains and this cobalt water all around. And I think I've got a picture here of Osprey in the harbor if you want me to share that. Stand by. Oh, wait a minute. I'm still practicing this sharing thing. Hang on.
So hard to share.
It is hard to share. Okay, hold on. Here you go. So we're going to share this, and then we're going to share this. Yeah. So so you can see it's basically a volcanic island in the Caribbean, and it was fantastic. We had come from Guatemala, where things were kind of tense. You go into a bank and there were armed guards everywhere you looked. All the banks were locked. There was a lot of litter, a lot of trash. We come to this island, and when we checked in, the port agent, we asked him, do we need to lock our dinghy up at the dock? And he was actually kind of offended. He just couldn't believe I even asked that question. Said, we don't have any theft here. And everything was wide open. And what was really cool was that they were very dialed into to the environment. They had, recycling everywhere. They had all these really beautiful pieces of artwork talking about the ecosystems. And it turns out that they're part of UNESCO Seaflower Biosphere Reserve. So it was really an extraordinary spot. I'd love to go back there.
So Wendy, talk a little bit about the boat that carried you on all these adventures. What kind of boat was it? What kind of shape was it in when you got going? I mean, I know Johnny's really pretty handy around boats. Was it a ton of work, or what was going on in that part of the trip?
Yeah, well, we looked around, and she's an Adams 45. She was a steel boat. She was built in Australia, designed and built in Australia. She'd been owned by about 3 other people before. We found her in Annapolis on the Hard. A Canadian family was selling her after being on her for, I think, like 4 or 5 years, and going throughout the Caribbean on her. And I think they also went over to Gibraltar. But anyway, she was laid out in a really interesting way. We really liked the way she was laid out. We liked that she was dead simple, because Johnny wanted to build everything, which she did. And so we spent the first summer, we just took her up to New England and kind of shook her down and shook ourselves down and figured out what we wanted to change. And then that winter we did a ton of work, and then continued on, and then left the following fall. So steel boat, interesting. Not my general milieu. I'm more a fiberglass girl. Don't know if I'd go back to steel again.
So did it have a very deep draft, or was it?
She was 5.5 feet, and then a centerboard put her down to 10.
So it was okay in the even down in the Mentos and the very shallows of the Bahamas. You didn't have any problems.
It was great. It was great. No problem at all.
Wendy, I have another question from one of our viewers, and actually I have 2 questions. The first one is a quick one, which anyway, it'll be a 2-parter. But you're one of the more prolific writers in our business as a journalist, a novelist, an essayist. So the second part of the question is, how did you get into writing? And the first is, just before you get into that, can you just update everybody on the time, the exact dates that you were actually cruising?
Yeah, we left in November of 2008, and we returned in November of 2012.
And how about the writing? How did you get in? How did you start your career as a writer?
Well, I went to college thinking I was going to be a novelist, and that didn't exactly happen. So I had like 1 semester to go, and I had to pay rent, and I thought, well, I'll just start writing for newspapers or something, right? So I ended up starting off at my hometown newspaper in Pennsylvania, And then I ended up working for the Associated Press for 3.5 years, which is what I felt was where I really learned my, writing and journalism chops was at the AP. And then, because I grew up in our family with a magazine called Soundings, I was pretty burned out after a while at the AP, and I was looking to change, and Soundings was looking for somebody to run their Annapolis bureau. And I thought, there's no way they're going to want a wire service writer. And they did. And so that's when I sort of made the shift into kind of a more monthly format. So I've been writing for magazines now, for, God, I don't know, a long time. And the creative writing part has come more since I stopped, a little bit more since I stopped sailing, actually, because there's just a little more time for it. But I don't know how to describe that whole career. It's just, I write.
Well, you got one of your fans just mentioned that your novel Stillwater Bending is just a fabulous book, and yeah, actually, that we're getting a few thumbs up on Stillwater Bending, which is a terrific book.
Oh, thank you.
Do you have another? Is there another novel in the works, or do you have another one? Do you think, or what? Where do you stand there?
No. I sincerely doubt it.
Wendy, here's another question from your old mate, one of our contributors, Jim Carrier, and he's done some Caribbean sailing.
He's an AP alum too.
Exactly, got a newspaperman for a great newspaperman. Jim hasn't really asked. He's more made a comment, but I think you'll know that to turn this into a question. Jim says, "In what little Caribbean sailing I've done, I've always been struck by and bothered by the first world, third world divide. No matter how low budget I lived, I know we appeared to the locals as a quote unquote yacht.
Yeah.
Covered all kinds of interactions, from buying fish, negotiating tours, to expectations that we were rich Americans. Thoughts?"
Thanks, Jim. That's a big one. Yeah, I agree completely with that. And I never felt comfortable with that. And because I think too much, the way that would start to translate in me was I would start to feel kind of lonely. I felt like an outsider a lot. And I don't know if that's a bad thing necessarily. I guess if you're trying to be a traveler, it's kind of a bad thing. But it does it keeps your perspective, I think, kind of straight, in that you're absolutely right. You're guests in someone's country. I mean, just because you can anchor in the Gunayala all winter long for about $5, at least you could when I was there. There were actually cruisers who balked at that. They didn't want to have to pay, the owner of an island group like $5 to stay there for 30 days, which blew my mind. And you can't, I don't know. I guess some people are better maybe some people are better at assimilating that way and not feeling that kind of tension, that kind of conflict. But I admit I did. I always felt like, I don't really quite, I'm a guest here and I love it here. And I'd like to be able to be a local here, but I really am a guest here and I need to behave like a guest. I don't know if that helps answer that question.
Hey, Wendy, I heard a little ruckus going on there in the background.
Oh.
You maybe have a dog?
Yeah, I do. And you're gonna ask.
How'd you pick her up?
Well, hang on here. Oh, geez.
I'm a dog lover, so let's see a little picture of the pup and
Okay,
hear the
well,
story.
hold on here. I got to do this thing again. I'm just so awkward with this. I should be better at it by now. Okay, see that? Is that sharing?
Yeah,
Okay.
looks good.
Okay. So this is a picture of her after we got her, maybe about 2 weeks after we got her. And the really short version of this story, which I could go on and on about, and people have heard me go on and on about. is that we were in the Gunayala in Panama, and we were anchored in this place called the swimming pool, which a lot of people are familiar with down there. There's basically all these little islands around this, and they're all owned by different families, and some of them have people living on them and some don't. This particular one did not have anybody living on it. And one day our daughter came back and she said, "There's a little brown dog on that island." And I went, "No, no, 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 there's not. I'm not hearing you. I don't want to hear about it." But she said, "Yeah, there really is. There really is." So so I went in finally at one point, and sure enough, this little pup comes out of the woods, and she's tiny and starving and had these massive ears that were just incredible. And when I saw how little she was, I pretty much lost it. And so began a slow, quiet, protracted battle on the boat about, can we possibly adopt this dog? Should we, and of course we've had dogs our whole lives, and Johnny and I have, and leaving two dogs behind was really hard. One of them went to my brother, and another one went to a friend. And we didn't want a dog on the boat, it's a pain. But this puppy was obviously just starving to death, and she was almost feral. And so Johnny said to our daughter, "Okay, here's the deal. If you can get her onto our boat within 2 weeks, we'll take her. But you're never going to do it because she's a feral dog. That could be a raccoon. That's a wild animal. It's never going to happen." And I remember turning to him and just saying, "Well, I guess we just adopted a dog." And he said, "What do you mean? It's never going to happen." And I said, "That's your daughter. You just threw the gauntlet down. It's happening." And it did. It took a while, but we would take her little bowls of rice and fresh water, and she started expecting us. And eventually, over weeks, she let my daughter touch her. And anyway, we got her into our dinghy, we rowed her out to the boat, and never looked back. So she ended up sailing with us about 8,000 miles, we figured. And she's the coolest dog I've ever had. She's wicked smart. She's incredibly adaptable, but she doesn't like wind anymore. She's afraid of windstorms. And she still loves going out on the boat, though, to the beach whenever she gets a chance. Yeah. And she's barking and angry with me right now because I put her outside.
So what's your boat fleet look like these days? What do you got rid of Osprey when you got back, or passed it on to someone new to go off with?
Yeah, and the great part of that story is that he's become a great friend, and we are in constant contact, and we even sail with him at times on Osprey. So it couldn't have worked out better. It was extraordinary, and we love him, and he loves the boat and takes extraordinary care of her, and I can't imagine anything better. But yeah, she needed to not be with us anymore, so that worked out really well. And so we got a trailerable wellcraft used that we wanted to get out on the river and on the bay with, which we do frequently. And then we had Peterson 34 that we had owned for a long time when the kids were really little. Actually, we got when our daughter was newborn, and Johnny had tweaked her up beautifully from being a flat out torn up racing boat into a really beautiful cruising boat. Cruised her as much as every day we could on the Chesapeake, all the while the kids were growing up, and that's the boat they grew up sailing on. So when we went sailing, she was sold to a friend. When we came back, he said, "I never could convince my fiance that sailing was a fun thing, and do you want her back? And can you get her back?" And so she's come back to us, and right now she's waiting to have her decks record and a new non-skid put on the deck, which is hopefully happening in the next couple of months. So I'm hoping to get out on her late summer and fall. But that's the fleet. It's pretty pared down right now.
So most of your cruising these days is done on the Chesapeake, like weekends and little adventures?
Yeah. And then occasionally when Osprey wants to go north, we'll go on a little trip up north with her if Paul needs us, which is a lot of fun. There's some islands up in the Gulf of St. Lawrence that I'm really interested in that I'd love to take her up there, and he's all about it. So it's not going to happen, this year, but maybe in the future. I'm really interested in higher latitude sailing. I think I'm not a tropics girl anymore. Like when Bean last week said it was 152 degrees on her deck, I just about died. Yeah, no, couldn't do it.
It seemed a little excessive.
I did.
So will you and Johnny, at some point take off again, do you think? Or
Yeah, I don't think we're going to do the whole 9 yards again. I don't know that we're going to sell the whole kit and caboodle and go off for years, but I definitely want to, I definitely want to go again. I definitely want to go for at least, prolonged months at a time. And I really miss being on the water all the time. The hardest part to me about moving back to land, two things. One is the giving up the freedom, and two is giving up the connection to the natural world. This is a constant connection, to the weather, to the sky, to the water, to all of it. And I knew it would happen. I knew there was nothing I could do about it really, but yeah, that's the hardest part for me. When we were getting ready to leave Panama, it was interesting. The morning we were leaving, we took the dog into the beach for a walk. And I said to him, what are you going to miss the most? Because we knew we were going back to the States, And I said, what are you going to miss the most? And he just said, the freedom. I mean, look at this, you can just go and find a beautiful beach to walk on and, find interesting people to be around. And also the choice, hey, let's go to Bermuda. Oh, okay. Yeah, sure. Let's do it. That's a beautiful thing. So I'd like to recapture some of that, but I don't think we're going to go, full on again. I'm not sure. We'll see. I mean, the first thing you learn is don't make a plan necessarily. Make a plan, but don't get too tight to your plan. Be flexible.
I think it's remarkable that you've covered that much ground, those many miles, and you've done it all. What was the longest passage you figure you did?
That was the trip across the Caribbean from Santo Domingo, Dominican Republic to the Rio Dulce. That was like 12 or 1,400 miles, I think, something like that. And it was gorgeous. It was great.
We're seeing a fair number of new people coming in and buying boats and taking off. It's actually kind of exciting. We have a bunch of new writers, and it's kind of, if you had a little bit of advice for people getting ready to untie the lines and go, what would it be?
Well, I completely would agree with what Bean and Jamie said last week, which was go. Don't hesitate, and don't try to make it all perfect. It never will be. And don't try to get it all done. You never will. You just got to go. You will find a million reasons why it's not the right time or you can't do it. And you just got to plot. You just got to go through that and not let that stop you. And I would say, don't be afraid to take the small bite. Don't be afraid to take the small step. Don't feel like you have to take a huge step. Just take a little step. Really, just go. Our goal was simply, people were all like, oh, are you going to circumnavigate and are you going to do all this? And we said, no, we're going to get off the dock. And then the other thing everybody said was, where's your first destination? And I said, the Road River, which is the first river south of Annapolis. And they're all like, oh, Sophie's such a smart ass. And I said, I'm not. I'm telling you the truth. All I want to do is get off the dock to the Road River. And then we'll figure it out from there. And obviously we had, done enough planning and that sort of thing to know that it wasn't going to be just that. But that was true. I just wanted to get to the Road River. I just wanted to get gone. And I really think that once you take that step, then it's not so hard. You just have to keep taking those steps. I would also, the advice I would give to somebody going out initially is, people say, give it a year. I'd say give it 2. For some people, the first year is pretty rocky. It's hard downshifting from a high intensity life sometimes, and your life becomes pretty intense when you're getting ready to do this sort of thing usually. So some people downshift better than others. So I would just say, give it the time it needs for you to really begin to feel at home in that skin, and don't try not to set a time limit to that. Does that help?
Good advice. Good advice. Well, time's kind of flown by here. We're actually a little bit over. just want to remind everyone, this is a series, which means we'll be here every Wednesday night for the next few. Next week, July 1st, we have Carol and Captain Fatty Goodlander, they're longtime friends of Cruising World, and they're in Singapore. They should be fairly entertaining, and it'll be kind of good to hear what's going on the other side of the world. And then on July 8th, we have Andreas Hyde, who has done a few stories for us. He sails his Jeanneau 37 up above the Arctic Circle every winter and goes free diving with the orca whales. And he's got some,
What?
he's a crazy man.
Can I go there? Can I go with him?
He's got some great footage that he's going to show us, and, you know, hand gliding and scuba diving and all sorts of crazy stuff. So yeah, we'll just be back the next couple of weeks and having some fun. Herb, any last words?
Wendy, you were fantastic. I know you were very nervous. You knocked it out of the park, girl. Good job.
Oh, you're very sweet. And I bet you're going to the Arctic, aren't you, jerk? Herb and I are polar nuts. Herb and I found out that we collect books about polar exploration. We didn't even know that we both did this, but we do.
Good job.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I was gonna say, any last thoughts or words there, Wendy?
Oh, I don't know. Thanks.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And it's nice to talk to you guys. It's always fun to talk to you guys.
Well, it's been great catching up with you. Hopefully we'll see you in Annapolis this fall and we can have a real cocktail, a real Mount Gay.
Yes, sir.
So thanks for tuning in for Cocktails with Cruising World. Hope to see you next week.
I'm going to go rescue my dog now.
See ya.
See ya.